insight in doing this work. That will be our presentation outline. Just skip right to the next because of time. Globally, we have the statistics are known. About 1.35 million deaths on the world's roads annually. And when we come to Africa, we have about 93% of these fatalities on our roads. And that is owing to the 60% of the world's vehicles that are actually located within Africa. Now, the deaths in Africa, or the age range that has the highest death is between 5 to 29 years. And there are still also non-fatal injuries amounting to about 20 to 50 million people. And these result into disabilities and severe economic losses that usually result into expensive treatment. Now, when we come to Ghana, specifically, there is definitely a drive to improve the accident, to improve our road infrastructure in a bid to reduce the number of accidents. And there's a lot of infrastructure developments, but we note, like everyone else has been able to note, that these interventions are mainly geared towards the private vehicles, and the vulnerable road users are left neglected. But who are the vulnerable road users? We would like to summarize a vulnerable road user in the image you see on your screen. We are talking about the cyclist, we are talking about the pedestrian, we are talking about the child going to school. We are talking about anybody that does not have an external protective covering that can actually cover them in case of an accident or a risk of an accident. But are the vulnerable road users in Cape Coast actually safe? And if they are, how safe are they? And if they are not safe, what can be done? This is what we seek to answer as we go through this presentation. The objectives were clear and were to establish, first of all, to establish the prevalence of casualties and crashes involving the vulnerable road users in Cape Coast, and to assess the availability and adequacy of the existing infrastructure to support and protect the vulnerable road users. And these were derived from the research questions, which were centered around determining the existing data sources on road casualties and determining the recommendations for improvement of road safety on selected roads in Cape Coast. That is our study area, and we focused on mainly 3 sections of roads. That is the commercial street, the Pedro Abra Road, and the section of the N1 highway, as you can see on that map. Our methodology, first of all, we did collect the data, and that data we used both primary and secondary data. In regards to the secondary data, we did collect historical road crash data, and that we got from the Building and Road Research Institute. We did road condition surveys, and those were done on site. We did on-site interviews of the road users, but focusing on those that were actually walking and cycling at the time, as you can see the images. And the number of people that were able to interview, key to note that these were qualitative interviews. We were able to interview 41. And we also went further to go to key informants such as the police to actually get expert opinion on the issues that we were actually dealing with. Yes, when we got this data, we did analysis, and from the analysis, we were able to, for example, the road crash data, we were able to determine that the data was of course classified as per road user class and as per casualty, the severity of the casualty that was recorded. And the key takeaway from this data was that we had about 833 total casualties, and this represented about 44.5%. Okay, of these total casualties, 44.5% of these were actually vulnerable road users. So when we look at the crashes, key to note here is the fact that pedestrians, whereas they do not represent the highest number of casualties, as seen in this graph, they are actually second to the cars, the casualty in the cars. So the pedestrians, although they are not the highest, they actually represent a very significant percentage of the casualties as per road user class. And when you look at, of course, the fatality level, when it comes to the pedestrians, it's highest when it comes to the pedestrians, when you look at the graph on the other side. Right here. When you look at the fatalities, the casualties that the fatalities, when you look at the pedestrians, they are higher compared to all the other road user classes. So, when we went to the field to do the road condition surveys, most of the issues have been mentioned. But allow me to just remind you about some of the issues that have been highlighted. The issue of pedestrian walkways have been highlighted by many. You can see from that. The absence of pedestrian crossings. The dangers, the open drainage channels. The narrow streets with no dedicated bicycle infrastructure. You can see someone riding right in the middle of the street. The faulty pedestrian signals and improperly sited crosswalks that are actually faded. Where you have some walking space, it's really uneven and not friendly to walk on. Yes, so these and more that have been mentioned by the other groups are the issues actually we are dealing with. And when we did interview the people actually using those streets and those roads, there was actually a general desire for people to actually walk and actually make use of public transport and actually also make use of the active modes of transport. But the general feeling from the qualitative interviews was that people do not feel safe to use this infrastructure. So, when we went further to talk to the police, who are our key informant interviews, they did agree with the points of view that were given by the people on the street. And they were mainly talking about the fact that most of the accidents happen on the highway. And when you look at the commercial streets, you have many of the accidents being as a result of the tricycles and motorcycles and knocking down the pedestrians. And they also talked about the narrow nature of the streets, the absence of the crossing points, the fact that children also constitute a huge percentage of the casualties, children that is 2 to 5 years old, and the time between 3 and 6 p.m. being one of the periods that is noted to have the highest level of accidents. So they did agree with each other, but what can we do? This is our second objective. What can we do? And from our discussions and from summarizing the information that we got from all the stakeholders we talked to, and our own expert opinion, we thought that it would be better and it would be advisable that we convert commercial street into a fully pedestrianized street. And fully pedestrianized, non-motorized, when having bicycle lanes and space for pedestrians. And also key to note that instead of having the open drainage channels, we are proposing to have covered drains that are subsurface, so that this space can actually be used by the pedestrians. When we go to the highway, we are not saying that we move the motorized traffic off, not the highway on the Pedro Abura Road. We are looking at not chasing away the motorized traffic, but we are looking at road apportionment, inclusive apportionment of this road space to provide enough space for the pedestrians and for infrastructure, greening, making the area aesthetically attractive for actually people to walk, like some of the areas we have in the university that have trees that are cool during the day that you can actually walk comfortably. So we are proposing a conversion, a basic reapportionment of the street. We are not talking about very complicated infrastructure, we're talking about really simple interventions that we can do that can actually make a huge difference. When we move to the areas that have the crosswalk, we are looking at those areas where the crosswalks have faded or where there is actually no crosswalk. Can we have better crosswalks that actually, like the tabletop crossings? But we shouldn't forget our dear brothers that are visually impaired. We're proposing that we have tactile paving to guide, to be able to, that even if someone is blind, they can easily be guided to this crossing. And key to note also that this pedestrian crossing we are proposing here has a traffic calming measure to it because it's a tabletop crossing. so cars can actually not go over it at a higher speed. When we go to the drainage issues, for example, you see this dangerously open drainage channel, we're looking at having subsurface drainage systems. It is as easy as covering this with nice slabs, or with a slab, or using culverts, closed culverts, so that actually this space can actually be used by this pedestrian to have a wider walking space. Also, it's important, whereas we have cyclists such as this very lovely gentleman that we met on the street, we need to promote use of helmets. So that in case you have, because we are looking at having a safe system, collisions will happen, but when they happen, what is the severity of the injury? By using a simple thing such as a helmet, you can protect this young man from severe head injury in case there is actually a collision. So we are proposing this kind of conversion. In addition to this, we are looking at also education and sensitization. Active mobility policy formulation. Can we have a policy for active mobility in Ghana? Is that something that is so hard to do? I think it's something that can be easily done. And in addition to these policies, can we also have active mobility manuals? Manuals that are geared towards promoting active mobility, designing proper active mobility infrastructure, separate from the usual road infrastructure manuals that we already have, special manuals for active mobility. We need to emphasize that safety should be first, and this also comes with education. Make sure that our vulnerable road users also don't be careless, do not cross the road while on your phone. So such sensitization is actually really needed to make this work. In addition to the infrastructure improvements, we can also provide support facilities. Support facilities such as fencing at public transport stops, so that pedestrians do not have to cross wherever they want. They can actually use a particular crossing point to access the public transport modes. We can use tactile paving, this we have talked about. An earlier group did talk about the need to have bicycle parking places. This is an example of a simple bicycle parking place that can actually be fabricated by local fabricators here in Ghana and can be placed so that people can actually be able to park their bicycles safely and secure them safely. So even the bicycle share services that will come up, as the previous group did indicate, they can use such infrastructure. Very affordable. The materials can be locally sourced, and actually these materials can also be easily recyclable. Then we're also talking about street lighting. We need lighting on our streets to make these facilities safe at night. And of course, I would recommend that definitely we use renewable energy when we are talking about street lighting. And also we need also to further emphasize public transport lanes. Here, of course, under the summer school, we are promoting more active mobility, but it also needs to be supported by public transport. How do we conclude this? Actually, the major data sources of road crashes are available in Cape Coast. We do have some data here. However, we note that certain periods are not captured in this data, and I believe to the data champions and the working in the data area, we can ensure that we have this data consistently collected to have all the periods covered. The visual surveys conducted reveal that there are gaps in regards to the safety of vulnerable road users. We've seen that. And the safety of vulnerable road users can be enhanced. It is possible it can be enhanced with simple, inexpensive modifications to the existing road infrastructure through retrofitting and reapportionment of road space. Realize that most of the recommendations we've made here can be retrofit. It's not about demolishing the whole space. It can be retrofit within the existing road space. Yes, you might think this is really ambitious, but it can be done. And it has to be done, honestly, because if it's not done, we are done. These are our references.